Yelrigu Namaskara, this is Radio City RJ Round Rajas. Dating back to our earliest times, the humankind has experienced the psychological impact of a wide range of catastrophes like including floods, earthquakes, windstorms, wars, and outbreaks of potential deadly infectious diseases. We are certainly no exception today as people try to figure out how to cope up and help others to cope with the stress caused by the biggest health challenge of our time, the COVID 19 pandemic. With about 3 lakh Indians have lost their lives, over 2.5 crore infected since COVID 19 first gripped our nation. The pandemic has taken a profound psychological and emotional toll on us all. During the pandemic crisis, it's common for everyone to experience increased levels of distress and anxiety, particularly as a result of social isolation. Physicians and other frontline healthcare professionals are particularly vulnerable of negative mental health effects as they have tried to balance the duty of caring patients with concerns about their own well-being and their family and friends. While it is important to stay informed, there are so many things we can do to support and manage our well-being during such times. So, what has been the impact of COVID 19 on mental health? And how can we ensure better mental health during such unpredictable times? To understand this and much more, we have Dr. Alok Kulkarni, a senior consultant psychologist based Hubli with an experience of 10 years in clinical psychiatry. Clinical psychiatry. He has completed post graduation in psychiatry from NIMANS Bangalore, an institute of national importance. He has also worked as a senior registrar in psychiatry at NIMANS for a year. He is currently engaging a private practice at Manasa Institute of Health, Manasa Institute of Mental Health at Hubli, and oldest and largest private psychiatric hospital in North Karnataka. He's regularly seen in national and international media addressing the current day and mental health challenges. Doctor, I welcome you to this wonderful session.
Thank you, Regis. Thank you for having me on the show.
So, can you please tell us what has been the impact of COVID 19 on mental health?
The impact of COVID-19 on mental health has been substantial, to say the least. All mental health professionals are increasingly seeing a diverse and varied range of clinical presentations in the face of this COVID-19 crisis. Some of the common clinical presentations that are coming to the attention of mental health professionals include anxiety disorders, depression, psychosis, mood disorders, delirium, dementia, obsessive compulsive disorders, Parkinsonism, and so on and so forth. It has been a challenge to rise up to the occasion, predominantly because India is short-staffed as far as mental health professionals are concerned. Although these problems existed even before the pandemic, the conversation surrounding mental health has become more acute in the face of this pandemic. Prior to the pandemic of mental health problems was already looming large over this country. But suffice it to say that the direction of the conversation has centered around mental health thanks to the ongoing pandemic.
Okay. Are there any specific population or high risk group vulnerable towards developing the mental health issue during this pandemic?
So, broadly, I would say that everybody can get affected. People who are affected with moderate to severe COVID-19 are especially vulnerable to develop mental health problems. People with pre-existing mental health problems are also a vulnerable populace. The elderly and children represent the other end of the spectrum for developing mental health problems. There was a very interesting study that was published in the Lancet recently. It is a very prestigious journal. So this was a retrospective cohort study which compared the incidence of neurological and psychiatric illnesses following COVID-19 in the next 6 months after having received the diagnosis of COVID-19. For comparison, patients with respiratory tract infection or influenza were taken. Surprisingly, the rates of psychiatric and neurological illness were significantly higher in the COVID-19 group. And the most common psychiatric or neuropsychiatric diagnosis made in this study were cerebral bleeds, ischemic strokes, dementia, Parkinsonism, mood and anxiety disorders, and psychosis. This basically meant that 1 in 3 individuals with the diagnosis of COVID 19 went on to develop either a psychiatric or neurological illness 6 months after having been diagnosed with COVID 19. Now, that is a huge number. Uh, and the study also showed that patients who had a more severe disease, say mandating stay in the ICU, develop more severe forms of mental illnesses such as post-traumatic stress disorder, and greater the duration of stay and longer the duration of stay in the ICU, the patients were more vulnerable to develop post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay. So, are there any signs or symptoms of mental health issues, and how do we understand if we have high stress and anxiety levels during this pandemic?
Okay. So I would broadly touch upon a few common clinical signs and symptoms for the general population to know when to seek mental health help. So depression is generally diagnosed when there are a set of symptoms that are seen for a period of 2 weeks in a continuous fashion. The three core symptoms of depression include pervasive and persistent sadness of mood that lasts throughout the day or for most part of the day, low energy levels, and anhedonia. Anhedonia is a concept wherein the person loses interest in activities that were previously pleasurable and enjoyable, say talking to a neighbor or watching television or playing his or her favorite sport. If these three core features are present in a continuous fashion for more than 2 weeks at a stretch, then it is wise to seek mental health care. Similarly, for anxiety, if the person becomes dysfunctional, is no longer to function, is no longer able to function, then it is wise to seek mental health help. Obsessive compulsive disorder patients with diagnosed with OCD would already be aware of their existing symptoms. If there is a worsening in the course of their disorder, if they find it increasingly difficult to cope up with OCD in the face of this pandemic, I would advise them to reach out to mental health professionals. So, how do we know that we are stressed out? When a person is stressed, biological functions get disrupted, predominantly sleep and appetite. If a person has started to sleep more than what is required, or is unable to sleep, or is getting up earlier than his usual waking up time, that is an indicator. If a person's appetite has gone down and he has lost weight in the last 1 month, say 5% of his in the last 1 month, then that is definitely another indicator to seek mental health help. Apart from this, we have other common clinical signs and symptoms such as being hopeless, worthless, not being able to concentrate at work, losing interest in all activities. And at the other end of the spectrum, if the disorder becomes more severe, then we can have patients who experience suicidal ideas, suicidal wishes, etc. So that is a clear sign of seeking mental health help.
Okay. But how do we cope up and protect the mental health during this pandemic?
That is definitely a challenge, Rajas. It is easier said than done. We will have to understand the ground realities to be able to come up with a plan to cope up with the current crisis. The scale and nature of the pandemic has been unprecedented. We have not been exposed to such a crisis in our lifetime earlier. So there are a few broad strategies that one can employ. One thing is to get our news from credible sources. I would advise people not to continuously stream news related to COVID 19 because that in itself can peak anxiety. Kindly restrict your screen time to less than 30 minutes per day. That is the first and foremost thing that one has to do, especially if the news is related to COVID 19. Media coverage also has to become more responsible. We have to showcase stories of hope and recovery rather than showing stories of pessimism and despair. Second thing is national toll-free helplines have been set up by institutions such as NIMHANS. Reach out to mental health professionals. There's a lot of stigma and taboo underlining mental health in our country. So one need not feel stigmatized in reaching out to mental health professionals. Any mental health condition is like any other physical health condition, say diabetes and hypertension. If one is diagnosed with diabetes or hypertension, it is but natural for one to go and reach out to his or her physician. Similarly, kindly reach out to mental health professionals. There are a lot of enthusiastic mental health professionals who are willing to help you out, but you
Mhm.
will have to go and reach out to them. The third thing is, although physical distancing has been mandated, it is okay to socialize through online platforms. We have a lot of online social platforms. Engage in the social platforms to have a productive conversation. Reach out to friends with whom you might have lost touch. It is a good time to regroup with family, friends, and relatives through social platforms. But invariably, what I find is that conversations gear towards the ongoing pandemic try to restrict that to the extent possible. So, what can one do staying at home? Indoor exercise is something that I would greatly encourage. The Centers for Disease Control in the United States of America advises 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week or 75 minutes of vigorous exercise per week. So, what I would advise is do aerobic exercises for 3 to 4 days in a week, and for the remaining 2 days, balance it out with strength and conditioning training. So, or you can even exercise for 5 days in a week and rest out for the remaining 2 days. Pay attention to your diet and sleep. These are vital. Now that largely during the lockdown, people have cut down on their consumption of junk food. They now know that it is possible to survive in a sustainable fashion without having to indulge in excessive consumption of junk food, etc. So pay attention to your diet. Eat fresh vegetables, green leafy vegetables. Consume a lot of fruit. Minimize the intake of sugar, and pay attention to your sleep. Uh, Along with a lot of disruptions that have come with this pandemic, one of the most common disruptions that I am seeing is disruption in their sleeping patterns. Just try to stick to your pre-pandemic sleeping schedules to the extent possible. Uh, do not allow your sleep schedule to be changed. I know it is easier said than done, but a conscious effort has to be done in this direction so that the circadian rhythm or the biological clock of the body is maintained. And lastly, and very importantly, when it is your turn, please do get vaccinated. There's a lot of vaccine hesitancy because of myths surrounding the dangers of alleged dangers of getting vaccinated. Please do get vaccinated. That is the only sure short way of breaking the chain of viral transmission. So, broadly, these would be the strategies to cope with the challenges of mental health during this crisis.
Okay, so doctor, like how can we help others or our loved ones for coping up this stressful times?
So first thing is to establish a conversation surrounding their ongoing stress, surrounding their ongoing mental health. Uh, Tell them that it is vital to reach out to mental health professionals. Do not have any kind of taboo or stigma to reach out to mental health professionals. Mental health is as important as physical health. The World Health Organization clearly states that there is no health without mental health. Uh, uh, Mental health is as important as seeking out help for physical health conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, increased cholesterol levels. So, one of the first things that one can do is to encourage your loved ones to reach out to mental health professionals. Second thing is, this is a good time to regroup, as I had earlier mentioned. You can have conversations. You now have free time. If IT guys are working from home, and if their schedules are a bit more flexible, then it is a good time to regroup and reminisce about the old times. And it's also a good time to plan for the future, to chalk out definitive plans about what to do once we come out of this crisis. The single most important advice is to encourage your loved ones to reach out to mental health professionals.
Okay. What could be the impact of COVID-19 crisis being on children's mental health, and what can parents do to protect their children's mental health?
Okay, so this is a very important question that you have raised. Rajesh. Children are an especially vulnerable population. Their routines have got disrupted. The schools have been shut down. Their interaction with their peers has come down drastically, and parents are at a loss to manage children at home. Parents have the pressure of working from home. At the same time, they'll have to devote enough attention and time to look after the routines of children. So the National Mental Health Survey was conducted by the NIMHANS Bangalore. This was a nationally representative survey which was conducted in conjunction with a lot of other partner institutes. This survey surveyed around 12 Indian states, and what it found was the prevalence of mental health disorders in children aged 13 to 7 years was 7.3%. And this is the lifetime prevalence. By lifetime prevalence, I mean proportion of children who have ever experienced or who have ever been diagnosed with a mental health condition. So 7.3% is a pretty high number. And the prevalence was twice in urban metros as compared to rural areas. The most common diagnosis made in National Mental Health Survey in children were depression, agoraphobia, intellectual disability, autism spectrum disorder, phobias, and psychosis. In the face of this ongoing pandemic, I have increasingly been encountering children whose course has been worsened. Say a child who has been diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, he has become more difficult to manage during this pandemic because of the loss of routine, because of loss of peer interaction. Uh, Children who were diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder have also found it difficult to cope with this pandemic. A, because they do not have access to their medications and counselors. B, there has been a loss of routine. So the children, I must say, have been badly affected by this pandemic. Again, I would say reach out to mental health professionals. They are the best professionals equipped with the necessary skills to take a decision about your child, what to do and what not to do. They will also engage in counseling, online counseling, etc. Reaching out for mental health help is vital, in my opinion.
Okay. What is the psychological impact of this disease on elderly people, and what can we do to protect their mental health, doctor?
So elderly represent the other end of the spectrum. They are one of the most vulnerable groups in this pandemic, mainly because their immunity would be low as compared to other people, and the trauma and psychological trauma of facing such a crisis is immense in the elderly. Some elderly will have to cope with the fact that they are losing younger ones in their family, they have lost their children. So coping with this is definitely stressful for the elderly as it is for everybody else. But the scale and the magnitude is much, much higher in the elderly group. Uh, in my clinical practice, I have had patients who have presented with worsening memory problems, worsening in their depression and anxiety, new onset of mental health problems in the elderly as well. So one of the things that we can do is establish a sort of routine for the elderly. Let them stick to that routine to the extent possible. If there's a lot of routine, there is a disruption in a significant aspect of one's life. So sticking to a routine is one of the positive ways of coping with this pandemic. The elderly can also regroup with their family members, and if the family has access to board games and other such leisure activities that can be practiced in the comfortable environs of one's home, kindly do engage the elderly in participating in such board games at home. And if you see that their routine has gone for a toss and that they have become, and if you are noticing anything strange in their behavior, any oddities in their behavior, if they are becoming increasingly confused, or if the memory lapse has become an issue, kindly reach out to your psychiatrist.
Okay. We all know that doctors, healthcare workers, and medical staff members are leading the battle against COVID-19 from the front, putting their own lives at risk with selfless determination for the sake of saving lives. They truly are real heroes in these challenging times. What steps can these healthcare providers take to ensure mental health during this pandemic?
Okay, so this is a topic that is very close to my heart. I have written about this, I've spoken about this previously.
Mhm.
Uh, the current priority for the healthcare workers should be to get vaccinated, and the government has done that. Uh, at this point, it is futile to sort of advise anything to the workers who are battling this war on the front lines, precisely because they hardly have any time for themselves. All they can manage to do is come back after a hard day's work. They're exhausted and they can barely consume their food and hit the bed because they're that drained. So it would be very pompous on my part to suggest anything for frontline healthcare workers. What I can suggest is the government and public should take cognizance of the struggles of the healthcare workers. They should compensate them adequately, and they should recruit more staff so that a rest cycle can be initiated. I have seen doctors doing continuous duties for days on end, which has taken a toll on their physical and mental health. In my own family, I have a lot of frontline healthcare workers who are battling on the front lines. Uh, a rest cycle has to be initiated, in my opinion. Uh, there needs to be a lot of incentives to be given to the healthcare workers. We have seen that the public has insensitively been attacking doctors who are battling this war. That is very unfortunate, in my opinion. Uh, yes, the pandemic has definitely affected the mental health of doctors, and I've had consultations from doctors, etc. That can always be done. Doctors have some level of awareness in seeking out mental health help. But what has to be done, in my opinion, is better compensation, better resource allocation, and recruitment of more staff. And public awareness programs should take place to highlight the efforts that all doctors in the country are taking to battle this pandemic.
Okay. Doctor, what if I'm tested COVID positive? This has become a common query from pregnant women in doctors' chambers. Doctors can sense the fear, anxiety, and uncertainty of the future when they hear this form would be mom. Therefore, it is critical that mental health issues of expecting mothers are detected and addressed in clinical practices. So, what are these mental health issues in pregnant women and how can they be addressed?
Okay, so the common mental health issues in pregnant women include anxiety, depression, and other severe forms of mental illnesses. Anxiety and depression are very common during pregnancy, and I have elaborated on the features of anxiety and depression. Soon after pregnancy, depression is also very common, as is anxiety and other severe mental forms of illness, such as psychosis. Uh, so, what if I become COVID positive? That is a universal worry, and I don't find anything wrong with that cognition during the current times. That is a worry that most of us would have, and this thought would have crossed our minds at some point in time. But what is reassuring is that the vaccination drive is picking up, the numbers are coming down, a national lockdown had been enforced, and most COVID 19 infections largely are mild to moderate in nature and at best require either home isolation or hospital care. The degree of population requiring ICU care, hospitalization is less. So that should be a reassuring factor. Specialist perinatal health services are available at NIMHANS, Bangalore, and a specialist team is available to cater to the needs of pregnant women. So I would advise for people living in Bangalore to reach out to the mental health services at NIMHANS Bangalore. A perinatal team is there at NIMHANS Bangalore, and that would be the best place for you to reach out for mental health help for issues relating to pregnancy.
Okay, doctor, what's your one final message for all the viewers watching this live actually right now currently?
Okay, so to sum it up, mental health is as important as physical health. Uh, Kindly do not feel stigmatized. Do not have any sort of taboo in reaching out to mental health professionals. Uh, for an Atmanirbhar Bharat, we need to have a Swasth Bharat first. And Bharat can only become Swasth if there is enough attention paid to mental health.
Thank you so much, doctor. It was a wonderful session, and thank you so much. And I wish you good luck.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Rajesh, for having me on this show.